Risk of Rain 2 is a game I've played non-stop for the past couple months, and for good reason. Its addictive gameplay, its emphasis on freedom when customizing every one of your runs, fun as hell multiplayer, and being so pleasant for your eyes and your ears has quickly made this game into a top 5 favorite of all-time contender for me. Not to mention that there are a total of 16 survivors you can play as, with each and every one of them having a completely unique playstyle from one another. And it's those survivors that are the focus of this video, because I am making a tier list for the survivors of Risk of Rain 2. They would be judged based on their skills, their playstyle, how much fun they are to play, as well as their designs, though not as prevalent. Other modes like eclipses, any artifacts, or the simulcarium will not affect these rankings. This is primarily based on a normal run going through 6 stages, then beating Mithrix, or looping around one more time. Now I just want to get this out of the way now, but at the end of the day, just play who you want to in this game. Every survivor in Risk of Rain 2 is good, and you'll get a good run going with any survivor. But ultimately, the factors of what makes a strong survivor in this game are 1. Damage, so single target damage, AoE or area of effect, and how well they use proc/burst items. 2. Mobility, with how well you dodge in combat and traversing through stages. And 3. Your overall safety, like tanking hits, range, crowd control, healing, etc. And with that, I'm stuck on this godforsaken planet, so it's time to chew bubblegum and kick ass. Sadly out of bubblegum though. Fellow fellas and lady fellas, here is my Risk of Rain 2 Survivors tier list.
3, 2, 1.
So the tiers we have for this list include OP, i.e. characters who are great at everything, the Great tier for characters whose strengths outweigh their weaknesses, Pretty Good characters who have a good mix of pros and cons, and finally the OK characters who have pretty noticeable weaknesses but are still winnable. Like I said, every survivor is good. Also, they will be ordered, so let's get started. Starting off with Agrid, who in my opinion is a pretty good survivor all things considered. This is mainly due thanks to his poison, which deals a set amount of damage to an enemy's max HP every second. Now on paper, this sounds busted, right? You could just poison an entire map of enemies and dodge every attack that comes your way. But in practice, the problem is that the poison itself takes a while to kill enemies, about as long as Starfield's pre-patch loading screens. Still not salty, Mr. Howard. And because of your pretty slow movement speed right out the gate, dodging every attack just isn't going to work in your favor. Staying in melee range is tricky as well, since Agrid doesn't have invincibility frames like Mercenary or innate survivability like Loader. You'll mostly be trying to pepper enemies away with your secondary and special skills once they're off cooldown, and just hoping they die eventually. Can't really say it's the most fun playstyle, but honestly it is pretty hilarious poisoning enemies and then laughing maniacally at them as their health continuously drops into oblivion. Next is Artificer, and well, she feels weird compared to the rest of the cast, so I'm going to put her in the pretty good tier. Like Agrid, her movement isn't the greatest, but what Artificer excels at is burst damage, and I guess she also decided to steal from Rob's bullshit tactics in Smash Bros, as she is one of, if not the only survivor in the game to consistently stall in the air. She has her ice walls so she can execute enemies, heavy damage on her secondaries, and even debuffs on her primary. Add on to that a few gasolines and 1 or 2 ignition tanks, and she can do tons of damage. Plus, Ion Surge and her jetpack hovering allow her to stall in the air with very little trouble, except for maybe golems and some aerial bosses. This is especially effective versus Mithrix, since none of his attacks can damage you. Did you not think about something like this happening to him at all? Unfortunately, her slow grounded movement and just being outclassed by other survivors means I can only put her in the pretty good tier. Definitely not bad, but it's just outclassed hard. Alright, now we got my first personal favorite survivor to play, Bandit. And he's a great survivor. If you're struggling with Bandit, I can almost guarantee you that you're not utilizing his passive well enough. So when I say you want to be behind a monster as much as possible, I mean you better get the f behind that monster right now. But in all seriousness, when you combine Bandit's passive combined with his special skill Desperado, which stacks in damage depending on how many enemies you kill with said skill, Bandit becomes an absolute beast. No pun intended. Doing double damage, which can be even more if you give him a laser scope? Yeah, Bandit should have about as much trouble as Bayonetta does plowing through her enemies. So basically lack thereof. And no, I'm not talking about the obvious, you weirdos. Plus he has decent mobility with his utility skill, helping you either get behind monsters or giving you somewhat of an extra jump when airborne. The only issue is that his special skill doesn't continually stack from stage to stage, as it'll go back down to normal. Otherwise, Bandit would be the best survivor in the game. He's like the spy from T-Fortress 2, but doesn't fall to the ground like a wet noodle. For Captain, I'm going to also put him in the great tier right behind Bandit. Lack of mobility aside, Captain is just about everything you could want in a survivor. Spam your primary shotgun attack as much as humanly possible. His passive gives him microbots which shoots down enemies as well as block projectiles, and when he gets drones, he'll get microbots on those drones as well. Or go for one of his secondaries that is a literal nuke for the sake of memes.
The memes.
But what makes Captain a great survivor is his special skill, where he gets 2 beacons that he can use and activate, and you can mix and match between them. Those include healing, shocking enemies, recharging your equipment upon use, and the best one, hacking any chest, drone, or shrine to get it without paying any gold. That is absolutely massive considering you could potentially get a legendary item or multiple items from shrines for free!
Free!
Honestly, if his movement was just slightly better, he'd be one of the best survivors in the game. But because it's not, he's only going in the great tier. Now we come to the first DLC survivor in the Seekers of the Storm DLC, and a returning survivor from Risk of Rain 1, Chef. And, man, Chef is so disappointing. If you were to compare Chef from the first Risk of Rain to this one, you'd notice a downgrade more massive than Dante in the Devil May Cry reboot.
You're an asshole!
Hey man, don't shoot the messenger. I just speak the facts. During most encounters, you'll pretty much just be spamming your cleavers, which aren't even that potent, and the only way to really deal huge amounts of damage is by hitting monsters with your special, then rolling over them with your utility, then finally using your Seer secondary skill. Why must this be so fucking specific? Other than that, Seer does pitiful damage, has awful range, and the burn debuff doesn't even help that much either. All of Chef's skills feel like they could be put on other survivors and not in one entity, and that results in Chef just having a weird kit and playstyle that just doesn't mesh together all that well in this game. He tried cooking, but couldn't quite make his masterpiece. Just don't put him in the same kitchen as Gordon Ramsay.
He brings that pissing over, and the big surprise is the fucking bass is fucking raw!
Next up is Commando, the base survivor you start with upon playing the game for the first time. Yeah, he's just okay.
Did he just say, aye, he did?
The classic jack of all trades and master of none character who's fairly balanced. He has the tools in his kit to cover just about any type of situation, but doesn't really excel at anything. And that's my biggest problem with Commando. In a game like Risk of Rain 2, having more noticeable and more powerful strengths will make you stand out not only objectively, but with the fun factor as well. While you still have good stuff with him, like having one of the strongest primary attacks and his mobility is average, he doesn't have the utility or burst damage to back up his kit. And for a survivor with ranged attacks, you kinda have to be closer to an enemy to get the best results. Isn't that completely counterintuitive? I don't know, man. To me, it just feels like Commando is just here, and much like Artificer, gets outclassed by other survivors who can do his job better. But at least Artificer has gimmicks on her that make her one of a kind. Commando just has nothing. Sorry, Commando mains. Ah yes, the stereotypical engineer. And he's not a great survivor, but at the top of pretty good. His turrets are what make this survivor a dangerous threat, because when you use his turrets, those turrets inherit all your items you've collected. Grabbed a focus crystal? Now your turrets do more damage when monsters get too close. A delicate watch? Now they do more damage. Bustling fungus? Then stationary turrets will be healing every second. Dio's best friend?
I'm alive! I'm alive!
The turrets also take the aggro away from most enemies, so you only really need to worry about grabbing mobility items while foregoing some damage. However, Engineer's turrets should not be the end-all be-all while playing as him. They're his best friends, certainly, but you can't rely on them for everything. His only real downsides is that his mobility is terrible, his primary attack sucks, utility skills are okay, and he can easily be swarmed if too many enemies are left unchecked. Though his mines, the spider mines in particular, are pretty good. Engineer is definitely a fun survivor to play as, especially in a multiplayer run, but he's way too gimmicky to go any higher up on the list in my eyes. Alright, we're going back to the Seekers of the Storm DLC for the secret survivor, False Sun. And he's the first survivor I would classify as overpowered. Honestly, I think the False Sun is a little overtuned, since you can pretty much do anything with this guy and have a good run. It doesn't matter that his movement speed sucks, because his passive can just give you more movement speed or attack speed, or even flat armor and health regen, which is just busted. His slam attack does so much damage, his special skill is also super busted, he just doesn't feel super balanced. He's definitely fun to mess around with, given how you can pretty much make any kind of build on him and he will perform pretty well. But yeah, this guy is just super overpowered, and maybe I feel like he could take a couple nerfs. For Huntress, I think putting her in the great tier is an appropriate spot for her. Movement is super important in this game as it allows you to traverse maps and get items faster, as well as dodge more enemy attacks, and Huntress excels in that field. She's not doing the most damage, but she does pretty consistent damage, especially since her primary attack is auto-aim, so you should be hitting at least something when running around as Huntress. Kind of like how you always get something when Steam has games on sale. Don't deny it, you've all done it at least once. Not to mention, she has some of the best skills in the game. Her secondary skill can hit multiple targets in one use, her utility skills allow her to move around even further, and her ballista special skill is also very good, allowing her to stall in the air and shoot off 3 powerful shots. The only real issue is preventing her from being an OP is that she won't do the most damage, and she is pretty squishy. Like a glass cannon, but a little less on the cannon. Regardless, if you like playing a hit-and-run playstyle, then Huntress may be your choice. Ah yes, the loader. She's absolutely busted, so she goes in the OP tier, no questions asked. Being another one of my personal favorites, Loader is essentially the turn off your brain and point and click character. Did a scary enemy just spawn in front of you? Just punch it. It's that simple. And yes, I'm being genuine. You punch an enemy, you're most likely one-shotting it, whether it's your primary, utility, or your Thunder Slam special skill. Loader will have no problem being not only one of the tankiest survivors in the game, but also will just punch everything in one shot. The only real learning curve to Loader is learning the intricacies of her grappling mechanic. But once you learn to swing like Spider-Man, it's literally Jover for anything that gets in your way. Plus her passive makes her immune to fall damage and grants her a temporary barrier when attacking. She's just so good, and so much fun once you get the hang of her playstyle. Honestly, she makes Balrog from Street Fighter look like an embarrassment. Now we got the Mercenary, and honestly, he's only a pretty good survivor, but nothing else. Playing as Mercenary is like working super hard on an essay you have in school, only for your instructor to give a tiny little check mark at the top of your paper. He takes a lot more effort than most survivors in the game, and from my experience, a bit of a glass cannon. That being said, if you know what you're doing, Mercenary can be a ton of fun. He's the only survivor in the game where his passive gives him an extra jump, so he already has great mobility. Having invincibility frames is also a huge plus. Expose is also a really interesting mechanic, where after a certain number of hits, enemies will get exposed, and your next attack will not only deal additional damage, but reduces your cooldowns by 1 second. Not that bad in all honesty. So why is he so low? Well, for one thing, he is the squishiest melee survivor in the game, and he has no healing in his kit. So you better pray to Palutena herself that you dodge all attacks from enemies, otherwise you're pretty much a dead man and will have to deal with Hades' trolling ass.
Hey look, an exo-tank!
Hey look, who cares?
But yeah, because Mercenary is so squishy, it always feels like I have to work harder with him, and for some, that doesn't exactly sound like fun. So I'm putting Mercenary here. Alright, for Multi, he is going to be put at the bottom of the great tier. The only thing bad about Multi is mobility. I mean, you do have his utility skill to get out of sticky situations, but it'll stop when you hit a big monster or an elite monster like a Golem or Elder Lemurian or something like that. Aside from that, Multi is one of the most versatile characters in the game thanks to his Retool special skill, which not only allows him to access 2 of his 4 primary skills per run, even though the Nail Gun and Rebar Puncher are the only ones worth using, but also gives him 2 equipment at the same time. Double Eccentric Vase, anyone? Or go his Power Mode special skill and use both primaries at once and gain a bit of armor. He's also the tankiest unit in the game with the most HP, and combining all of this with a secondary that stuns enemies for easier kills, and you got a pretty strong robot on your hands. He's pretty much just a tankier and more versatile Commando, and it's honestly a crime I put him so low on the list. Though maybe he's not as dangerous as Wally rubbing dirt in your eyes, let's be real. And now we head to the Survivors of the Void DLC with Railgunner, and she's broken. Like best survivor in the game broken. What a dumb character. She's loader with range that can one-shot anything with her sniper secondary skill so long as you get Gud with aiming for weak points. Even then, that's not specific to the survivor, so even if you don't hit the weak points, you can always rely on her special skill to do tons of damage as well. Her passive always grants her guaranteed crit strikes when hitting the weak spots on monsters, so add a few watches, a few crowbars, and a laser scope, and you're just destroying everything, including bosses. She doesn't even get swarmed by many monsters because, again, she one-shots everything. Absolutely crazy character. Sure, her attack speed is pretty slow and doesn't really have any AoE to speak of, but once you get good with aiming for the weak spots, you'll have some of the easiest runs of your life as Railgunner. Seriously, I don't even main Railgunner and I've had really easy runs with her. She's just that good. Next up is Rex, and, well, I definitely will say he's a pretty good survivor, just feels very peculiar. Once you get over the fear of your health bar constantly dwindling up and down in combat, you'll learn that Rex can be an absolute force to be reckoned with. You'll mostly be spamming your primary and secondary since his secondary has a ridiculously low cooldown, and then use your utility and special skills when your health gets too low. Sure, he may have a little more nuance when playing him, but honestly, not really. Attack, heal, repeat till everything dies. But because of his gimmick of attacking and healing at the same time, it's something I'm honestly just not a fan of, but I still cannot deny the potential Rex can have in your runs. Just don't use him on Eclipse. He's trash in that mode. Back to the Seekers of the Storm DLC one last time for Seeker, and she is a great survivor in my opinion. Seeker comes packing with some of the best set of skills of any survivor in the game. Her primary attack is okay, but other than that, you have her utility Sojourn, which is arguably the best in the entire game, as it's basically Volcanic Egg as a skill, and it opens up so many opportunities, especially when combined with one of her secondaries, Soul Spiral. Soul Spiral is honestly what makes Seeker so strong. Sure, their melee range on a ranged survivor, but by itself or combined with Sojourn, they just do so much damage and give you a temporary barrier on hit when utilized correctly, and it's insane. Then you have her special Meditate, which combined with her passive Inner Strength, for each time Seeker meditates, each stack increases her healing and damage, and when you hit the 7th stack, where you get Revive and Saving Grace, multiplayer runs get a lot easier, since Saving Grace will heal survivors when reaching low health, and of course, Revive brings one or more survivors back from the dead. In multiplayer runs, Seeker is broken, but in single player, not as much considering that Saving Grace and Revive aren't as useful, hence why Seeker is going in the great tier. Finally, to round things out, we have my personal favorite survivor and my main in the game, Void Fiend. And he's OP 100%. Void Fiend has everything you could possibly want in a survivor's kit. Range, AoE, healing, mobility, burst damage, and massive stream damage. Void Fiend's kit is just so consistent. The gimmick of Void Fiend is its passive, Void Corruption, where you're either in its base form or corruption form based on that little circular gauge right there. You get to basically choose which form you want to be in, but there is an optimal strategy with this in mind. You want to stay in your base form as much as possible, using your special skill, which not only heals you, but lowers the % of your corruption, because base form Void Fiend has a lot more flexibility in combat. And once you get to the teleporter event, that's when you want to transform into corruption mode and just go to town on those bosses, as that's where your burst damage comes from. Void Fiend is just so much fun to play because it's so flexible that you can make any kind of build with them and always do well with them regardless of difficulty or mode. You'd have to actively try to make Void Fiend look bad. And if that doesn't scream OP, then I have no fucking clue what will. And that's my tier list. Not sure if I'm predictable as fuck or if I surprised anyone, but hey, it was fun to make and hopefully fun to watch, which is what matters. I'm curious what you all think about the survivors in this game, and if you want me to make more survivor tier lists based on the game's other modes like Eclipse and Simulcarum. Let me know in the comments about that, as well as who some of your favorite and least favorite survivors are to play. Now anyways, I gotta get back to playing this game because yes. Catch you all in the next video. Peace!